Hi, how are you? Good morning. Well, morning for me. I don't know what time you saw you're in. Um, my name is Pilar Hernandez, and I'm going to talk about teaching science in these times. So basically, I've been a science teacher for as long as I've been teaching. I didn't study to become a teacher. I am a biochemist, you could say, pharmaceutical biochemist. It's a combination of sorts. And I ended up teaching almost as a fluke, but I've learned so much in the years that I've been teaching that I wanted to share a little bit of what I've learned. So the first thing is that I always get this question from my students: Why do I have to learn this? Is the typical question where I give them like some sort of lesson, I don't know, about the atom because I teach chemistry, and they're like, "What is this good for?" Um, and then I have to come up with like something to explain why do they have to learn this. We already know like which skills are going to be developed, but what I want to know is like how I approach this topic is in terms of my experience as a student. So when I was a student, I went to public school, and right now as a teacher, I teach at a private school, which means I have like kids with more resources and privilege than what I grew up with. And so, in my experience as a student, I had teachers that were not specialists on the subject. So, um, they probably just based their classes on a textbook, and that was it. So, things that were difficult for me during my student years. I didn't know how to study. Like I am very good at remembering things, so I didn't do badly in class, but I didn't really had like study habits. The content was never really completely clear. It didn't really make sense to me. Like it was mostly irrelevant, and most of like what I'm talking like middle school years. And if I wanted to ask a question, like to try to understand things, the teacher usually was not very good at explaining outside of the realms of the book. And so it wasn't easy for me to connect all these ideas. And it ended up being one of those classes where you study for a test and then you forget about it. And so at the end, I wasn't sure of what I knew. So by the time I got to high school, I did get a couple of very good chemistry teachers, which led me into the path of I want to study science because I wanted to, um, like in my mind, it was very difficult for me to decide on a career path. And so what I kept thinking was that I want to be able to be part of something that leaves a mark in the world. So at the time when I was growing up, like in the late 90s, I was finishing high school. Um, the biggest problems in the world were about usually like the ozone layer, like ecological issues, which we have way more than that right now, and um, the AIDS epidemic, you could say. Were a lot of cases of AIDS everywhere in the world. So they were like talking about developing a vaccine, but so many things going on. So I thought like I was interested in science because of these past teachers that I had, but I wasn't sure of what I knew. So I went into the career of sciences without really knowing much. And I recall that basic chemistry on a chemistry career was not clear to me, you know? So, I know that we're supposed to teach these skills to our students. It's supposed to be like the four C's: communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking and problem solving. And you develop skills of observations. But the situation is while this is the skills, not all teachers are able to develop them in the kids. And I had teachers that were able to somewhat interest me in doing them, but I wasn't completely in it by the time I chose a career. And so I had a teacher that helped us out with the basics of chemistry, you could say. And because of that, when I became a teacher, I just went into okay, so which skills should I focus on? As a teacher, I need to help my students. I need to help my students for what is to come later on. So I teach the ninth grade, and you have to understand that in Mexico, the curriculum is seventh grade. The kids see biology, eighth grade they see physics, and ninth grade they see chemistry. That's how it's been for several years. I really am not aware of like the decision making of the curriculum, but that's how it goes. So I try to help my kids get like the most about the topic that could help them further, and not just in a science class, but like in life. So critical thinking, but for decision making. So something that helps them later on in their lives. Reliable searches of information. So how to discriminate between good sources and bad sources. How to distinguish between actual news and fake news. Like we have had recently. I focus a lot of memorization, but not like memorize to forget, more like memorization that can help them link different topics that can help them remember things like in a chain of events. And definitely problem solving. We all know that that one is like super important for our lives, for any sort of thinking process. So I go with those skills, but I approach it in different ways. Some are very classical, and some are others like a little bit more into let's be creative and do different stuff. So, as a teacher, like my experience has been, first of all, I focus on the basics because I want my kids to have the basic knowledge that I lacked. So I go in the very basics of the subject. They have to know, for instance, in my class, which is chemistry, I teach them what is the most important things that you should know about the periodic table. And as long as you know how the periodic table works and what information can I get from the periodic table, you can link it to the atom, and you can link it to reactions, and you can link it to compounds, and it's all like related. One of the things that I have trouble with is like making them interested, like with a question like, why do I have to learn this? Most of the time, the explanation I give them, it depends on the topic that they're asking on. It varies. Sometimes we tell them, well, we need to understand this because later on we're gonna see something different that is gonna work at, like I said, like a chain of events, and we need to be able to have like a basic foundation of knowledge. When they say like, well, like for my life, how's that gonna help me for my life? I tell them like, well, it's related to something you know. I had recently, well, we started, right, classes on the end of August for us and like beginning of September. So I had this first topic about matter, where we were talking about how to classify matter into pure substances and mixtures and so on. And they're like bored. I have a kid who's like not interested. This is a girl who I've heard because I have a list of like kids that had problems in the previous year with like science subjects, and so I had her on my list of people that I need to make sure that they get interested and connected in the class. And so I have her, and she's like non-responsive. We were online at the time, so she has her camera off. And I ask her questions. She's like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so I stopped the class and I asked her, like, what is it that you like? What are your interests? Like, what is the thing that you love the most? And she's like, makeup. And I'm like, dude, this is so much chemistry. So I asked her to go get her makeup, and I tell her to take out her products, like your beauty products. Which ones are your favorite ones? Now tell me which ones have this or that state of matter. Which ones are solid? Which ones are liquid? How do they look like? And then from there, we move on to how do we classify them in terms of chemistry. And she got so into it, and she connected these ideas so well that I saw her more willing to participate in further classes and improving her interest a little bit, because the point is that we get them connected not only with their interests but like in the real life, like how are these things going to help me out to know. So I told her like these can help you figure out, for instance, when you know what things are made of, how they look like, when they go bad, how to decide when to throw away your certain stuff without even trying it on, and waiting for a bad reaction in the case of makeup. So things like that helped out. And so the first thing is that go with the basics and relate them to things that they like. The secondly is most activities are about research. Right now, I don't have a textbook. Like, I decided that this year I was going to go without a textbook. So I made a program in terms of like, these are the topics that I want to cover. And I give them every new lesson. I give them a list of ideas, terms, or questions to look up. I give them a couple of sources, and they have to look elsewhere as well. And they have to always check a minimum of three sources, because I tell them you have one that I give you, another one that you can look up, and then if they don't say things that match, then you have to get a third one to help you decide which one is the best source of information. So I always tell them like it's a minimum of three sources, and this can help them um, discriminate, like this is in an easier language, or this one is like more profound. And I go with them, like I go over the information with them, so they are able to determine which ones are reliable and which ones are not. For instance, at the beginning, I remember telling them like you can't use Wikipedia, and I still use Wikipedia. It's like we can go against like the number one answer from a Google search, right? So I tell them like you can use Wikipedia, but you cannot cite Wikipedia, and that gives them like a question mark, right? And I tell them like Wikipedia can help you figure out what is it that you're looking for, but you go with the references of Wikipedia and then start looking from the sources of the information that people that made that Wikipedia article took it from, and then you start your research from there. So I use their first instinct to go with like the first link that appears in a Google search, but then they have to go a little bit further. And in the end, when we make projects, because science, it involves projects, they're related to real life situations. And I've had a lot of success in the past few years with that they related to something that they, like I said, they're either interested on or they would like to know more. This past year, the one where we were completely online, we had to do a science fair, but we couldn't do it in the proper way with like experiments and stuff. So I made them to be about research, and I gave them choices. Like this time, I did not wait for them to choose a topic. I gave them the choices. This is a list of topics that you can choose from if you want. If you want something extra, then you can tell me. But most of them just chose one of the options I gave them. And so they were like, in terms of, I just gave them like a general idea and they had to focus it on something. And usually it was something they could be interested in. For instance, I told them about, okay, so look up shortage of water. This is a big issue right now, and it's an issue in a lot of places. And then look up how soap is made, and then develop a question based on that. And the last one was something about food. How does the human body get energy? Those were like the topic main ideas, and then they had to give me like specific turn into it, like a specific twist to that topic. And some people got very interested and they did very good research, and some others just did it for the grade as usual. But when they presented their projects, I could see the differences, and I could see like which ones were um, into it and which ones were not. Now, one of the things that is important for me in my class is like when we go through the scientific method, which is almost at the very beginning. We've been learning the scientific method all of our lives, and rarely I've seen kids have had, like when they get to me, kids have had this idea of actually scientific method is doesn't necessarily need to be scientific. It's just a method to problem solving. So I go through the steps sometimes with like different twist of approach. Like think of a problem that you have. What's a problem that you have? And they can give me an example of like something with their friends, something with their family, and I tell them like, and then how do you think you can solve it? Because sometimes these problems are not solvable, right? So these are just sometimes just worries of the teenage years. But I make them go through the process, and they realize that the process in which they can solve a problem is very similar to the scientific method. And this is how I explain to them that the method was developed only in a way to make things systematic, not necessarily because there are steps and you need to fulfill them. And one of the most important things about the scientific method that science teaches us is that we can make mistakes. And mistakes are not failure, mistakes are an opportunity to grow. And the thing that you have to do, like as a person, when you're solving a problem, is that when you make a mistake, the best thing that you can do is own the mistake instead of denying it, so that you cannot repeat it again, so that you grow from it and then move forward. So I always go through this process like of thinking. It happens every year. So it leaves them with a sense that they are not afraid to make a mistake, and it makes them a little bit more confident. And I have, at the moment when I thought about this presentation, I had really no basis of coming up with these conclusions unless I had support from my students, or former students actually. So I went into Instagram and I posted a story and I said, so for those former students of mine, can you tell me what skills you learned in my class that helped you later on? And some really older former students from the first generations I gave classes to, they actually gave me very nice answers because they're already like people with degrees, graduated and working. They're already adults, and so they, a couple of them were like very, very sweet answers that told me like, well, with you, I learned. I have it in writing because I love that answer. This guy is a biochemical engineer, and he said, let me show you. Well, I don't think you can see it very well here, but he sent me a very long message, and he said, like, I learned how to learn, which is, I love that because that's one of my goals, that they learn how to study, because I didn't know how to study when I was their age. So that was great. And he says, I enjoy science and its mysteries, crave knowledge, ask questions, look for answers, apply the scientific method to things that interest you. You would be surprised, he said, on how fun and easier it is to digest if applied to things you like. He says, I learned how to challenge myself to become a better person, scientist, or friend, and to do it for myself. Do not be afraid to make mistakes. See, this is what like gave me the evidence for my conclusions that I thought I had, and so this was like confirmation to it. He said that it made him fall in love with science and math, and that's why he became a biochemical engineer. There's another girl who's now a doctor, and she said, like, when I got to your seventh grade class of biology, because this is the first topic the first subject that I teach, that I taught, she said, I thought I was going to be an architect, but after your class, I went for the medical sciences, and she's a doctor now. And then there's another one who said, she's a chemical engineer, but she's like, she sent me audio, so I couldn't put them in the screenshots. But she said, like, with you, miss, you made us memorize a lot, and I had difficulty remembering things by memorization, so I had to find the logic in the ideas. And I was like, that's exactly what I wanted you to do, because every time that I told them you need to study this, I would tell them you need to learn how to remember things with like techniques. So I would try to give them tips on how to study. For instance, things like how to name a compound. It has a technique. So if you remember that technique, you can do it every time. And it's just more about finding the logic in things. And so she said that as an engineer, that helped her a lot. So I got a lot of very fun answers, and I was very glad to see that my job as a teacher for teaching science is actually paying off in terms of they are learning how to make decisions, they are learning how to problem solve, and they are learning that making mistakes is okay. That's it. Thank you for coming.